Hey, brother. So, taking a moment to talk to myself, I think this is really exciting. I'm really happy to be talking to Bryce again for the first time in a while. Hopefully, he can hear me. In fact, I'm actually feeling called to see if I can increase my volume just a little bit here because probably going to be talking on the low end. Reading. Okay, I think this is fine. I can always project my voice. I'm going to read here while we figure out how to get our good brother Bryce back here into this conversation with us. Amrita Tattva Satya.
Hello, sir.
Hello, I like your hair.
Thank you. I like your hair.
I immediately excited.
Hmm. Same here.
Definitely felt myself just drop in within the last few seconds.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Same. I was just tuning in.
Good, good.
Hmm.
And I'm really appreciating how easy it is to speak from my heart with your conversation here. Is that a scar that you have on your head? I'm just curious.
So it's not. It's also not a birthmark. It's
Mm.
actually a anomalous hyperpigmentation, and I've asked a few people about it, acupuncturists, traditional dermatologists, and none of them really know what it is or
Mm.
what it came from. There's a slight roughness to it, but it's
Right.
otherwise it's just like every other skin tissue.
Interesting.
Hmm. I have had this very interesting experience in the past. Can you hear me okay? Just to check.
Yeah, yeah, I can
Okay,
hear you
great.
great.
Um, yeah, in the past, I had this experience where I've had, I think, 3 different times now where I witnessed myself being killed through that spot in my head. One was a bullet, one was a sword, another was blunt force.
Yeah, it's really interesting. As you told me about that, I was getting flashbacks of a situation like that.
Hmm.
I
Yep.
immediately put it to, let's say, the systems-based approach of reincarnation and how our physical bodies, to some extent, are or have a relationship to previous forms. And as we evolve or take on new karma in this life, how we inadvertently, through the pull of, untying the knots of karma,
Mm.
um, old information, old, right? It's a weird word to use here,
Mm.
can come into the present moment, come into this body. So as you mentioned that, I was looking at that. That looks a lot like a scar, I'll tell you.
Yeah, it really does.
So you're a warrior.
Or Harry Potter, one or the other.
Harry Potter was a warrior and a badass.
That's true, dude. Yeah, for real though, he really was. Yep. What strife?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mm. Yeah, it's an interesting conversation um, to consider about reincarnation. I personally I deeply believe in reincarnation. Um, there have been instances that have rationalized that or been able to like logically prove it to my mind, such as there's this one case over the past I don't know, past century. I feel like it was more recent, the past like 40 or 50 years, where a man was born and had buried money and like remembered where the money was hidden. And, that's sort of like there's a lot of unknowns in that. But then you also have instances of children who are barely like they don't have access to computers or they're not reading like advanced books or anything, but meanwhile they're over here, sitting in full lotus. They're talking about um you know other planets and like very advanced atmospheric conditions and things like that. And uh I think the
Yeah.
most notable one was this young lad. I think it was called The Boy from Mars. And he was talking about the past of Mars and how there were struggles there that led to its demise, if you will,
Mm, mm.
as a planet where there was a species at one point.
When I
Mm.
when I think of past lives, it's really interesting to me because I have experience as Brahma. And do you know what I mean by that?
Mm-mm.
It's like the Egyptians put it in a really beautiful way. Me and you have talked about it. People mostly are familiar with the yin and yang, but from where do yin and yang arise? And even looking at it inside of the different sort of philosophical or engineering systems of religion that we have throughout the world,
Mm.
um, we do notice that there is initially a duality, but then there's something that underlies the duality that gave birth to it. And the Egyptians had a really beautiful way, in my opinion, of describing that. They called it the infinite waters of Nun.
Ah, yes. I
Mm.
remember you mentioning this before.
And I believe that this is also an illustration, and it is as above, so below, as all of life. So we can endlessly notice this pattern continuously.
Mm.
And I notice it most plainly in meditation, whereas there's the infinite waters of Nun, of pure potential. It's not order, it's not chaos. And the first thing born from that is actually chaos in a sense where there's darkness. First, there's Nun, which is this limitless possibility. It's actually refusing to take form, it's part of its nature. And the way that they described it was as this pitch dark, watery substance. But I also believe that every single color that could exist arises from this.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing to arise from this, and usually it has a rule, so to speak, this is the way it was told to me, that Nun has a rule to never create form. And it broke its own rule and created darkness. And darkness was there first. And then once darkness was created, it had no choice but to also be light. Once one thing was made, duality was forged forward too. So the
Mm.
moment there was darkness, there was also Atum, the first unit of consciousness, the first moment of spatial awareness.
Mm.
And there began the battle between chaos and order, more structure or more chaos. And then all the other gods, so to speak, are sort of the continuous fragmentation of the original Nun
Mm.
experience. So it's when we're talking about past lives, it's a buggy conversation for me because of my experience as Nun. So my experience as Nun, or as they would also call it, Brahma, means that I experience things without duality. I'm aware of duality. I see duality. I experience duality, but I am in my baseline. My consciousness experience is only experiencing the Nun, the infinite waters of Nun or Brahma.
Yes.
And so it's this infinite platform. And this platform is aware that my body is a structure and my thoughts are a structure and my memories are a structure. So who is getting the reincarnation? You see, so it's interesting.
That has been my feeling as well with it. Um
Because part of me even feels just out part of me even feels like if you were to die, what is to say, and I obviously, if you were to die, what's to say that your information doesn't go directly into me, for example, because we have such a close kinship,
Right.
and then you are
And
reincarnated through my example, through my
mhm,
experience.
and you do find that in close relationships where there is a passing, uh, whether it's communication with what is perceived as that individual's consciousness or some type of passion may be taken up. And perhaps it is just truly purely psychological in the sense that an individual wants to feel closer to the person who passed. And so, whether conscious or subconscious, they decide that they are going to participate in some of what that person was doing.
Right, in that karma.
Right. Yep. And yeah, it is so fascinating. I don't believe that there is like this like true soul lineage. Like you said, I think that there is a duality, and that duality is, I mean, you know, we're in this physical world right now where duality is a theme. Yet, as you said, always coming back to, I think, like what I call it is just the oneness, the symbiotic state, and finding within that chaos of existence harmony in everything. And it's in those moments where we have a perceived synchronicity, not necessarily, how like a lot of new age people will use it, although that is very true. Like if you are meeting the right person at the right time, but what we often will neglect is even sitting here, even when you go to the bathroom in the morning, or how I didn't have pants on when you first reached out to me this morning. All of these things are a part of the harmony as much as they are a part of the chaos. We just tend to look towards one or the other. Even in situations of war, I imagine that someone could sit back and see that, wow, there's a harmony to this, even though it's a lot harder to see in those situations. Um, there is something perfect about their being there in that moment.
Yeah, so I think there are two things coming to my mind, and one of them is really exciting. One of them is just an image. I guess for anyone listening, they would like to know about the Bhagavad Gita because it's themed around that, around Arjuna going through this war, and he asks Krishna, his teacher. He's like, "How can I kill all these people?" I mean, he's so skilled. He has one bow and arrow, and one arrow can kill like 100 people or 500
Hmm.
people. He's so skilled. So and he's so pure. He's examining his own consciousness, and he's like, how can I do this? How can I do the war? And Krishna has something interesting to say about that, and I think I'll say it and then take an engineering approach to that as you were just doing. Krishna said something along the lines of to hesitate is the real sin. And
Hmm.
that's interesting because it's almost to hesitate in this context, in this perspective, is to stop yourself before you finish the input to cycle back around and update.
Hmm.
So the real crime is almost to never begin. We have to make mistakes, but enlightenment there's enlightenment, there's liberation, but enlightenment in itself is not just the awareness, but the ability of the mechanism in of itself to continuously update itself and to not inhibit that process.
Yes.
And so to take a little bit of an engineering perspective, because I've been learning some interesting things about system science and using it to deepen my studies. And
Hmm.
I don't know if anyone could see this pretty little chart here.
Yeah,
And
I can see it.
yeah, wonderful. So there's karma, which would be the input, and the direct translation for karma is action. So there's karma, and then the output is karma foul. So this is a system essentially, but this system works in my computer, it works in my body, it works through the chakra system, it works in the universe, it works between planets, and so on. So it's as above, so below, uh, continuously mirrored.
Hmm.
So there's some sort of input. Then there's transport, which would be known as vata, air or space, by the mystics. And so we have an input, we have vata, which is transport. And this is where sometimes we need to give ourselves space from the input to the conversion. That's a really interesting thing too. And then once it's transported, where is it transported to? Well, it's transported into processing and storage, pitta and kapha, metabolism and the body, and the structure. So this is also what I've been thinking about as we were talking with reincarnation too, because there's some input. And it's interesting. There's even, we can even update this graph a little bit more, but for now, this is going to work. There's an input, which is the karma, which is software. Then it's transported into metabolism as a type of energy, which we could call Shakti even. And then storage, which we could potentially call that Shiva, but Kapha is a better word, which stands for earth and water. And then it's also transported again to the output. And the difference between this system and an intelligent system, and sometimes in this, we can also get into why people take in certain drugs like alcohol, for example, is because they're trying to disrupt the process, which usually happens around an intelligent system right here at the karma file, right here at the output. Whereas at the output, what we have is this is the place where Arjuna would follow through the action completely. It would be up to go through his software, be metabolized, stored, and then be into his actions in the world. Only from here can he use his indriyas, his senses, the best senses he has, and there are levels of senses for these engineers, these mystics. Observe the disturbances. Perfect. Okay. In the output, the disturbances are noticed by the sensor, which is what AIs do. They observe the indriyas through some form of senses. Then they work back to the controller or the brain to be updated back into the karma, back into the input. And between the input and the controller, which is the brain, is the goal.
Humans are very interesting in that we can be so arrogant and so naive as to believe that we know more about the universe than we truly do. Not in reference to what you just said,
Right.
but the process of human cells and how they are able to read and then transcribe from DNA, the inherent mechanism in which is it's debated to this day. Some people say it's purely chemical. I don't believe that at all. I believe that it's mostly electromagnetic, as is, the very foundation of our nature is primarily electromagnetic. And it's just a fascinating concept to think that similar to even our physical electromagnetism, which, I have meters we can measure. This has electricity running through it. My computer over there, like all of these things it's almost like a dense version of ether, if you will, that we're channeling, controlling from chaos and utilizing. But I can only imagine that karma and other energies along those lines facilitate similar processes just at different stages of our existence, whatever our existence may stem from. There is a chart similar to when you were describing the waters of noon and how it was basically a incarnational path, and it moves from total unconsciousness to being to is, and then I think the being and is part were actually the same. I haven't looked at the chart in a while. And then it moves to the point of I, which is the first point of true separation. And then it begins going down into these layers of, well, what am I? And it starts to identify and separate further and uniquely develop all these different characteristics until the point of conception, whether it be a planet, a universe, individual, animal, new life, any of it. And I love the way that you put it. That was like a very similar
Yeah, I'm even
concept.
getting a little bit of a flashback of when I first started learning Raja Yoga, um, which is Raja Yoga focuses on concentration, which in a sense, and Raja also means power, to empower. Usually
Mm.
Rajas were warriors. So this is maybe where your battle scar comes from, brother. And so we had with the Raja Yoga, they have mental development essentially. And with the mental development comes, I'm getting an image now. I didn't even know where I was going with this. I'm getting an image now of the controller, which is essentially it's the part that's able to I like the words that I used here. Making decisions. It's like
Mm.
the part that's able to make decisions. And with the development of our ability to make decisions, we can be a more effective and efficient mechanism. You know, and to some extent, we have no choice, the karma that comes in our lives. My mom asked me yesterday because she's living with a pretty wild roommate. Um, he doesn't have a clear understanding of these things and decisions. I love that. I love that so
It's right
much.
on the top.
That's beautiful. Actually, well, while I'm talking, I'm also gonna pull out my cards here.
I was on a work call yesterday, and that was the last one that I had pulled for myself. It was funny that,
It is.
yeah, decisiveness is power.
Choose to choose.
Hmm.
And the ability to choose more effectively um, is a beautiful art form that can probably be unappreciated.
I have I think I mentioned to you my friend who ended up in the psych ward not too long ago, and me being in preventative care, similar to yourself, where longevity and preventing crisis before it happens is imperative, and it is very important for both of us. I take that perspective and I look around at crises that are happening all around the world, and I realize that prevention starts years, like over 50% of the true lifetime of, if you will, the energy that is consciously recognizable of what is coming. Um, I know that I'm going to get old and I know I'm going to age. So I'm taking care of myself the best that I can now. And in the instance of my friend, I see it how his parents and their parents and the parents before them, who luckily I have enough like history to recognize this from stories. But if it had started way back, like 3, 4 generations ago, can you imagine how different his life would have been today? And
Very
so when
different
I'm
karma.
making my decisions today, I'm thinking, how is my decision of today going to affect the life of others tomorrow? And how is this going to affect the future of this reality that I'm in now? And it's almost frustrating because we live in a world where people's attention spans are so short and their prefrontal cortex and frontal lobes are being, you know, devastated by technology, by distraction. And because of this and the constant induction of dopamine in the brain, we aren't thinking in the future like we once did. We're losing touch with the future. Although I do believe that a lot of people are starting to gain more touch with it and be more mindful. But right now, the dominance in the world are people who, as much as it's important to live in the moment and live now, it's okay to think of the consequences or the benefits of what
Yeah,
seeds you are sowing.
a little bit about what I've been noticing, and it ties into what you're saying, even with like obesity and even something smoking cannabis, which for a while, until really recently, where I was understanding the mechanisms of how it suppresses theta oscillations, for example.
Hmm.
And I had that experience. I know that it suppresses REM sleep, but I didn't
Yep.
mechanically understand exactly which parts, which mechanisms it was altering. But specifically theta oscillations, which I'm
Hmm.
even wearing, my neurophone device here,
Oh, cool.
um, which helps train certain brain states. So, and me having abused psychedelics as I had for so long, you can imagine what my brain looked like and felt like. Like I
Hmm.
definitely know what it's like to transform into a different person, to continuously break apart on in a way that I don't think most people have any experience with.
Mm-mm.
And it reminds me so much of this obesity problem. Like now we have, and this is not a judgmental thing by any stretch, of
Of
course.
course.
It's a mechanistic thing,
Hmm.
Um, it seems to me like if all intelligent systems near the output sense disturbances through the senses, through their sensor, to come back to the controller, to the input, that for one reason or another, either by exogenous manipulation or by hereditary installments of
Hmm.
poor patterns, that we have this habit of the moment we sense an output to dull the senses through
Hmm.
food, through cannabis, through alcohol. Um, for example, through cannabis, it seems it's a different dynamic than alcohol, but the alcohol to me is very similar to food as to the mechanisms as to why people use it.
Yeah.
Whereas with dopamine, they're seeking a reward. So they're seeking the updating of the output without actually updating the output.
Hmm.
And whereas with alcohol being a depressant and food being structurally, mechanistically a depressant, which is why I break my fast with food, of course.
Yep.
Um, it dulls the senses,
Hmm.
and I've been trying to understand. I suppose education is the way, and that's why people like us, our work matters. It really is. It really does matter.
Yeah. It is important.
And I often find a lot of solace with thinking about the Great Mother, because it sort of helps me take a more connected attitude to this. So
Hmm.
me using that symbol, me thinking of you as my brother, and being able to actually see it, not like
Yeah.
it's
See
actually
it,
in my
feel it.
eyes. It's through my
Yes.
eyes. Like they call it rose-colored glasses. So I don't
Yeah.
just have on blue blockers. I have
Yeah.
I have
There's
the
a pre-filter.
yeah, exactly. I have the eyes of the Great Mother. So my goal from the beginning is love, and wisdom comes from love, from understanding how to love,
Hmm.
and power comes from the union of those first two.
Hmm.
And by using the Great Mother as this symbol, it's my association to the heart center, which is a large electromagnetic field that has, you know this very well, has millions of neurons associated there. So does the gut. The gut's important. But the gut
Hmm.
something is something that had to come natural to me because of life situations and circumstances,
Right.
especially people who get involved in martial arts tend to focus on the hara, on the gut, and it's really important as a foundation, which you can, again, we come back to food, we come back to why people are dulling the senses, their association
Mhm.
to death and the unknown, and their groundedness, and their it's interesting to study those dynamics, but the heart is something that's new for me.
Hmm. Not long ago, I was researching uh, a correlation between low levels of a neurotransmitter called GABA being associated with the inability to process glucose, either to the point of full-on diabetes or um, hypoglycemia, which I tend to lean towards hypoglycemia because when I was at my worst with the fatigue when I was 20, um, I I had a very sedentary lifestyle, and that's changed since then. And my not only my insulin sensitivity, but my ability to metabolize glucose has gone up since then. That also happens to influence your ability to metabolize oxygen. And so the reason I had started looking into that is because of what everything that had happened with my friend.
Right.
And just to sort of circle back to this quickly, was there's two major neurotransmitters that alcohol and a lot of drugs and also food tend to affect. But I'll stick to primarily alcohol, as this is where I was researching it. Serotonin is radically stunted when we drink alcohol. Uh, that's
That
probably
makes
why it's
sense.
considered a depressant.
Right.
But even before that, GABA is actually necessary in synthesizing serotonin.
Wow.
And GABA is what stops intrusive thoughts into the mind. It's what stops epileptics. It's usually always, if it's not like neurological damage, it is almost always like you'll always find like a correlated GABA deficiency at the
Right.
same time. So um, GABA is an extremely, extremely important chemical. And the problem with alcohol and sugar also, and things similar that will affect the GABA pathways, is that when we are introducing chemicals that are emulating GABA or utilizing the pathways of GABA but are not GABA, then we end up essentially stunting the neurochemical chain that is then going to create serotonin, and that will ultimately end up.
That's beautiful. Um, what's coming to my mind now is that Jordan Peterson example of what exactly serotonin is and the relationship it has on our lives. And that's a
Mm,
pretty big deal. Um, the first one is that meditation seems to augment these alpha oscillations as well as theta oscillations. Whereas, I recently heard this talk by Dr. Shiva Ayadurai, who was painting a systems-based approach to the real yogi versus the fake yogi. And and I know this experience firsthand, of course.
yeah.
And these yogis would actually take psychedelics and things like this incredibly rarely. Soma was something that was just used to, once a year during certain ceremonies under certain planetary alignments, at low dosages or certain dosages, to facilitate a moment of a kind of awakening, to give someone a taste of something or to help with certain circuitry. But it wasn't something that was the primary platform of their experience or their practices by any stretch of the
Mm,
imagination. And I think people naturally, intuitively, because they seek this clarity, they seek these things, um, they're looking for it exogenously.
yeah.
And to what extent we manage our compulsions is fascinating.
Mm,
When I look at something like alpha waves, it interests me probably more than other things as a man, because I associate serotonin to that example Jordan Peterson gave on the lobster. Whereas two things happened with the lobster who was given MAOI inhibitors and MAO inhibitors, sorry.
what is that?
A MAO inhibitor is something that slows down the degradation of these neurochemicals like serotonin.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So they also use this with ayahuasca, for example. They would take certain MAO inhibitors like B-capivine, and then take the root of, for example, acacia confucia bark, which has high levels of DMT in it.
Hmm.
And by inhibiting this part of the liver, it was stopping the breakdown of DMT because the body is so familiar with DMT. It's so good at synthesizing it. We're really good at synthesizing it. It comes from the liver, the third eye, and the lungs. We're so good at synthesizing it that when we eat it exogenously, it almost breaks it down before we can even feel it.
Hmm.
So MAOI inhibitors were one of the things that were traditionally used with these substances. When it comes to the lobster, they were given MAO inhibitors for that had an specific effect on serotonin. And this effect on serotonin made them raise their shoulders a little bit more back, and they
Hmm.
were more likely to win in disputes against other lobsters. So not only did
Interesting.
they feel more confident, but the actual internal whatever the mechanisms that serotonin seems to activate actually made them more likely to succeed.
Mm.
So not only did the MAO inhibitor do that, but of course, winning does that. When we
Mm.
win at something, setting small goals, for example, we're coming back to the systems-based approach that me you like so much. Setting small goals and feeling that sensation of accomplishment is not only dopamine, but serotonin. And the more often we feel that, the more likely we are to win the next goal.
Yes.
And it incrementally becomes more and more difficult, but we love it more and more. And it comes a little bit almost full circle to this asceticism, what I call enlightened asceticism, which is to take a systems-based approach to the input and to have a goal, a big goal, a goal called God, a goal called purity, a goal called the Great Mother. And this is the macro, right?
Mm.
And then my mind is the micromanager in this, the buddhi, the intellect. And I close my eyes and he navigates in the darkness. So we're coming back to the story of Atum and
Mm.
Apep. And he navigates in the darkness. And I also do this when I'm jump roping. So it's as above, so below. It's in every part of experience and dynamics inside of my schedule, inside of the way I process things. I'll
Mm.
close my eyes while I'm jump roping. And then slowly my body starts doing certain things. Slowly my arms will flip forward or my one of my legs will kick out. And my intellect is exploring the nervous system. It's exploring the darkness. It's exploring where the light could go. And I was learning about cells recently from a systems-based perspective.
Mm.
And I was trying to understand, well, what's the input? Like I was trying to find the input. And because somehow I was, sort of caged into the reductionist approach that we're often led to study things with. But then I looked and it's like, well, obviously with a plant cell, it's sunlight. Well, what is sunlight? It's light. So light is coming into the body as the input and it's exploring darkness. It's exploring darkness through the structure of my body and being. And so I think about these lobsters and I think there is a beautiful chemical platform for success. And it seems to
Mm.
be platformed um, or rise from an input set into their own karma from many, many past lives. And human beings are interesting because we have a lot of that, but we also have innovation. We also
Mm.
have the ability, more so than other creatures right now on this planet, at least the ones that I've seen, other creatures on this planet, to innovate new karma. And it's almost like we're all walking each other home in that context
Yes.
because we're creating this platform. Yeah, go on. We're creating this platform for ourselves to have community and to connect to the highest.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's always interesting to think of that in the sense that that really is truly what separates humans apart on Earth at this moment. While all animals and all living things have some inherent creativity, um, humans have a particular knack for turning it into something that is coherent and something that can be understood and experienced by other humans, although not always. And
I
it's
hear you.
funny how it's not exactly at the forefront of our mind in most cases that that is what we want. But then you start looking at things like, movies and pictures and videos and how uh, at the end of the day, people just want to share their creativity and they want that part of themselves to be witnessed. And
And how it's somewhat like a natural output to the input.
yeah,
And we look
yep,
at people who are like naturally more creative. And I'm thinking right now, like, what exactly even is that? What does that mean to be creative? Like to be particularly creative, right? Like
right.
they have like these charts that I've seen, they say everyone has creativity, but if we
Mm,
apply that standard to everyone, we do know that some people are more creative than others. So it seems like these people have, or just have an augmented ability to take in karma and continue to weave it together into different forms, different as various as they come, right? And then give outputs and share that.
An interesting thing is that the biggest differentiation that I believe between somebody who is creative and someone who is not is that somebody who is creative chooses to use it. They decide that they're going to use it because
Mm,
inherently we are all creators and we all have this gift of expressing ourselves in so many different outlets. And I think that the people who are creative just have a more intimate relationship with that part of themselves. And they make the decision to make it a part of their reality. Whereas some other people may find other outlets or choose to put their energy elsewhere. Um, but just in my own personal experience,
yeah.
creativity has solved a number of issues in my life in regards to self expression. There are some things, as you know, that are transcendent of language that we feel within ourselves. And it comes out in all of these different ways. And as we are transmuting this energy within ourselves, we can turn it into something that is powerful. Like I started making music using like a digital software back in December. Whenever I'm in like a weird place or I can't find the words or the right outlet for something, I go into the software. I take my little keyboard here and I make music. And
I love
there's
that.
something about that process
Yes.
that allows me to metabolize and to process, ultimately affecting the outcome.
What do you think about that process being your way of intuitively updating the structure? Like, back to the beautiful little graph that we had here.
Hmm.
Um, Something notices an output is off, but the more developed our senses are, the more subtle the data is
Hmm.
that we can and need to update. And music is so subtle in comparison to words, especially English in particular, among other
Yeah.
languages. Um, that music seems to have a specific ability. It's like, hey, you're messing with these sounds. You're creating an algorithm to input into the system to
Hmm.
update the structure of the thinking. It just feels off. It feels something is sick, something is somehow imbalanced within the structure. And it's playing with the output using the senses, these well-developed senses, in order to bring it back into the system and try to find not only coherence, but development, involution.
Hmm. Hmm.
Does that feel right to you?
Hmm.
Mm,
Yep.
mm.
Yeah, it's
I I also feel like intelligence probably comes to play here because I am I do have this intuition that and I don't think intelligence is necessarily the way we've defined it in the West,
I
um
agree.
or that IQ is even the way we've defined it in the West.
Absolutely not.
um it's it seems to be something that happens. I mean, we come back to the music and we come back to what are the underlying platform as early as we can get to the structuring of our neurons. And the more coherent and the more beautiful those structures are, the more
Hmm.
intelligence has room to flower, the more IQ has room to flower.
Yes.
This is speaking from someone who's in special ed his whole high school,
I
career.
was too.
Right. And we're geniuses. So
Hmm. Yep.
So in a way, I can't speak for you, but speaking for myself, it was definitely structural. It was completely structural. My brain couldn't process the input for the output. You put the book in front of me, and I didn't understand what to do with it. My brain just didn't understand. And I can remember what that felt like because now I've given myself a goal that orients to the input, and
Hmm.
so I can feel the cognitive, the structural difference. I'm no longer the same person, um, in the sense that we come back to Nun, Atum, and Apep. Whereas everything gets dissolved back to this, this watery goop, and is from that creates a new structure. I can remember who I was. I can remember what that structure was like. But the structure and the design is like comparing coal to diamond. The structure itself, the same substance, the same elements involved,
Mm.
but different pressure created um, a different, what's a good word to use? I feel like I've overused structure. Um, a different kappa, and a different metabolism within that kappa, within that water and earth, a different fire within those elements.
Mm.
So the energy is even the same. The pita, the metabolism is even the same, but the structure, the underlying structure seems to be, to me, so vastly different that I have this great compassion um, in association to the Great Mother for my brothers and sisters who I can see, I know that life must not be easy.
Yeah, for real,
Because
right?
for me, oddly, it is. I know that sounds weird to say, and people should never say that.
Mm.
I was in an explosion recently. I was in the middle of this explosion the next day, and even not even an hour later, my
Mm.
mind was totally clear. It's like my mechanism. I've been without understanding. I've inadvertently been practicing a systems-based approach by noon. He didn't explain to me that this is what I was doing, but
Mm.
this is sort of the way the mystics would practice it. They would take the systems-based approach, which I believe it's called the Siddha or the Siddhar, and it's the same engineering maps that I've been showing you. And they believe that by experimenting with the body with the systems-based approach, that we would understand the planets, that we would understand the world around us, that we would understand other creatures, and so on. And so what my diet does, my diet, right? I thought it was a diet. What my lifestyle does is it set me up to be the perfect mechanism to observe this. So why do I eat only once a day near the end of the day? It's a single input of karma during the end of
Mm.
the day, and my senses are hyper developed during the rest of the day, because this is what happens to the nervous system during a fast, not only with augmented growth hormone, not only with augmented, 1 second.
Mhm.
Regent Valet, good morning, ma'am. How are you? I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, it's been a while. Grandpa's good. Grandpa's good. I was just talking about the explosion, actually. I was just talking about the explosion, actually, with a friend of mine. Yes. Yeah, everyone's safe. Thank God. Uh-huh. Yeah, she came about an hour ago. Okay. Okay, so I'll send it to you when she's done. Okay, you got it. You too. Not only in relationship to growth hormone, but the fast facilitates an interesting relationship with um, what I notice when I'm fasting, especially when I'm mixing weight training or just anything physically, asanas, for
Mhm.
example, the asanas that I use, the standing postures, it's taking this nervous stress, right? I'm sensing it, I'm feeling it,
Yes.
and I'm taking these things, and the autonomic and sympathetic nervous systems are being forced to find cohesion with one another through these
Mhm.
asanas in the fasted state. And without realizing, I was becoming a better mechanism. So my ego had nothing to do with it.
Mhm.
In fact, it felt like, and I'm sure other people noticed this for a while. It's interesting, right? And I'm sure other people noticed this for a while. My ego was really young, so to speak, in
Mm.
comparison to my coherency, which is an interesting thing to have for a while, as long as that persisted until the ego itself had to break and reassemble.
Hmm. Yeah, what I was going to mention, that spark that I had there
Yeah.
is, I think that a lot of people will bypass a very fundamental aspect of being able to sustain, if you will, an enlightened or higher state of consciousness or higher state of being able to process and, if you will, metabolize different thoughts or different experiences. Um, for instance, well, I won't give an example, but just in general, the the physical vessel, we have to take care of this, and if we neglect it, these things are not sustainable. And I look back at I'm not super well versed in Buddhist stories, but uh,
Mhm.
when Buddha was Buddhi, when Buddha was when he
Very
was in
close though.
yep, when he was with the ascetics, I think it was when he was under the Bodhi tree, actually, when he had that moment of enlightenment where he realized that if he did not eat food, then he would never be able to sustain this state that he was seeking. And as simple of a thing as that is, like, I need to eat,
Yes.
and then we create more complexity to that, and we create coherence. And it's like what you were saying with like the serotonin, how it becomes harder and harder and harder. There is like points of exponential growth when it comes to our ability to take care of ourselves, but the hardest thing to sustain is the mundane little things that are going to ultimately be like those little like 1% or like half of a percent investments on a daily basis that is going to contribute to the future, speaking back to once again the preventative care and how that all affects our actions today affect tomorrow. These little things to take care of our vessel are imperative.
Yes.
And when they are neglected, the consequences become apparent in time and they become
Entirely.
impounded. Um, every decision that we make, even if it's a decision to not do anything or to do the wrong thing or to do the right thing, every single one of them is going to have an outcome.
Yeah.
And
I like
yeah,
that story a lot. She not Shiva. I almost called him Shiva. So these are interesting little typos we're having here.
yeah.
Um, Booty Shiva, which is
Rudy.
technically Booty Shiva. That's because Booty means intellect and Shiva means that which is not. So that's
Right.
pretty close description of Buddha.
Yeah.
Um, apparently Siddhartha, and Siddhartha also comes from the word Siddhar, which means engineer, technically
Mm.
speaking.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
yeah, yeah, it is. These charts actually, I broke down the representation from the Siddhars.
Huh.
That and we just use different terminology in the West.
Really quick, I just want to give a shout out to this show called The Gift.
It's a good one.
And have you watched it?
No.
Okay. It's in Turkish. Do not watch the English version. Watch it completely in Turkish. Let it read like a novel.
Yeah.
That show, I've watched it like 3 times through since it came out. It is one of the most profound shows I've ever seen in my entire life. There's like obviously it's still a show, but there has been something that woke up inside of me when I watched that show, season 1 and 2, and the third one should be coming out this year. That I it was just incredible. It just woke up some type of knowing, like whatever transmission was in that show, I received it.
Mm,
They're using a combination of pagan symbols that you'll recognize if you're versed in that type of symbolism. Um, but even the like uh, even people I know who are like really gung ho about their particular form of energy healing or their lineage of religious beliefs or whatever it might be, even them when they tuned in, they felt inclined to witness this the show and what it was about, and they watched it through and they were like, "Oh my god, like that was a journey."
wow.
So anyway, I just wanted to mention that
Yeah, no, I'm glad.
Sidar, which is why I mentioned it. Sidar is one of the characters, and the main character and the actual Turkish name of the show is Atiye, which means the gift. And Sidar is sort of an antagonist. It's almost like darkness to light,
Yes,
if you will,
that's
and
wonderful.
they unfold that relationship throughout the show.
Yeah. So Siddhartha, from these stories, he traveled with these ascetics, which is not what I practice.
Hmm.
What I practice, I have a different term. I call it enlightened asceticism. What he practices was asceticism. And there's this first photo of the Buddha. There are several ones that we see, but one of the ones that we see is him in whatever posture he's in. And his eyes have sunken into his head, his veins are showing across his ribs, and he's gotten to such a deep deprived state. Everything he did in his life he did with total commitment and total devotion to actually see if it was that. And that's beautiful, and it kind of comes back to the story of Krishna in a way, to not hesitate, to follow things out to the end, to see whether or not it's the truth. And he was sitting under one of these trees. The Bodhi tree is the one where he got enlightenment, but I believe this one was a different one. It doesn't matter. But he was sitting under this tree, and this woman came to him and she offered some food. And he had just realized that he didn't even have the energy to process, like to think. So we kind of come back to these engineering mechanisms again. He didn't have to metabolize his thoughts, to metabolize the new karma, or to restructure his own being. He didn't have sufficient input. This woman came with a bowl of rice or something like this, rice pudding, I don't remember what. And then he ate some of it, and he just had this realization of this middle way, which was, this is too far. This is not the way. My mechanism is falling apart, and it's undergirding my platform for enlightenment. No bueno. So he essentially leaves these ascetics, and at first they had a lot of disrespect for him. And he came back a few years later after sitting or a few days later, whatever he came back.
I think it was a few days.
Yeah, I remember he sat under the Bodhi tree, they say, for 3 days. And I had some interesting dreams about this recently, but he sort of just started seeing a bunch of colors. He
So fun.
Ridgeville. Yes. Mm. No. No, I don't see anything here. Mm. Mm. Yeah, it must be. Mm. Okay. Yes. Okay. Okay. No, not yet. She should be coming back soon. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Okay. Okay, sir. I understand. Okay. No, everything's clear. Okay. Yes. Okay. Okay, good. Okay. Thank you. Bye. There's some interesting irony about that call.
Hmm.
At the moment, there was some distraction.
Hmm.
And to maintain it is beautiful and part of life. It
Hmm.
reminds me again of the explosion, but because it's an explosion on many levels.
Hmm.
And during that first explosion that I experienced on February 18th, it was a lot like this. It was a lot like this moment a few moments ago, in the
Hmm.
sense where my mechanism had an input of feedback all of a sudden. And it's almost like I didn't know what work I had done on myself until so much feedback came in, and my mechanism, I can't even take credit for it. The ego can't take credit for it. It's simply I had no problems. And people that whole week were telling me, you have problems. Like, where are you going to live? What are you going to do? What about finances? And it's not that I didn't care. It's just I'm not worried about it. My mind was on its own thing. It's going to do what it has to do. My worry doesn't have any relationship to do with my processing of my mind.
Hmm. It's so funny how people, when they don't see a type of reaction, and it makes sense because I think,
Sure. They're coming from
arguably,
their own experience.
yeah, like more people tend to lean on the side of dissociation
Sure.
and neglect. But it's always interesting to see, like, I can be in an extreme level of stress and generally function better than what I've seen with a lot of people. And it's always interesting because people always think that, I mean, I've been called a sociopath, a psycho. Psycho is very different, obviously. I don't think people know what that actually means. But a sociopath is someone who they don't care about, they don't feel, well, they do, but it's so deeply dissociated and so deeply repressed, that they act without thinking or taking into consideration others' feelings and emotions.
It's
um
a weird reductionist word that we use here.
It is. It really is. Yeah. A lot of psychiatric,
Very reductionist approach
psychological.
we take to all these things. We don't take a systems-based approach, which is what I'm trying to offer and
Yeah.
understand more of. Which is we
Yep.
come back to the mechanism, we come back to taking a systems-based approach. So someone, if they ask me a question, like Adam, I have a good friend of mine named Sivitiana. She'd be like, she loves asking questions.
Mm,
World-renowned martial artist, and she's like, Adam, why these loops? Why these loops are here? I don't understand why. And she's like, how to stop judging others? She'll ask,
mm,
and I'll say it's a systems-based approach. So it's not giving any single answer. It's that it comes from several angles because you are a dynamic mechanism and a
mm,
genius. And I do believe this. And so when it came to Buddha, he came to realize under the Bodhi tree, and he came back to these people. It's so funny. We're back at this story at the right time. He
mm,
came back to these people. He came back to the ascetics, whether it was a few days or years or whenever they came back. And they all said, why are you here? They almost had a little bit of disdain, right? And
mm,
he didn't receive that projection. And somehow they accepted him because of his vibes. There was something about him.
just different.
And yeah, he was different. And he said, I've reached enlightenment. And they said, that may be so. And they kind of like half walked away. And then what he did was he said, have I ever lied to you? And they know he hadn't. So they
Mm,
listened. And that part seems important, that part about integrity. And it's probably important because if other people are going to update their mechanisms, they need to know that I have my shit together. They need to
mm,
somehow witness that over time, prolonged periods of time, and through stress, that what's happening in my experience is consistent, that I consistently experience a wide range of emotions that I consistently experience being able to think fluidly and effectively,
Hmm.
and that this is not about control in any restrictive sense. It's about total and complete embodiment of every faculty and every center. And some people might say, why do you need to do that? And the thing is, we have no choice but to have a goal. It's the way the life
Hmm.
and reality and our mechanisms here, while they're on this brief time here, work. Either
Yes.
our goal is going to be completely in the hands of our previous karma from past lives, and to some extent, that's true until it's not. We unravel
Hmm.
that karma and we choose a new goal, or we choose different goals, and we choose goals that align to the more higher overarching goal of God and purity and etc. Um, so I feel very much connected. And
Hmm.
even that day, my nervous system had beautiful, interesting experiences. And it was interesting because of how calm I was. I ended up talking to I don't know how many reporters. I was all over the news, just back to back to back, and just me smiling, like and I didn't even realize that that was a weird thing. But I just acknowledged. I'm like, listen, nobody died. Like you have to understand how fast this happened.
Yeah.
Like that, like it, there was no processing. There was no A, B, C. There was A, Z. Like
Yeah.
that's what
That's
it was
it.
like. It
Yep.
was like opening your eyes in a different dimension. That's how quick it was. There was no explosion. There was nothing like that. And what's interesting is I was in the middle of answering a question um by the doctor, because I scheduled a session with him the following Saturday, which was 2 days from this day. So I think this happened on a Thursday.
Hmm.
And do you have anything I can meditate on to optimize our call? I said. And he says, would I be doing what I'm doing right now if it were my last day on earth? And I was in the middle of this contemplation. I had just put on my wraps. I was about to go outside. And I didn't go outside because I was in the middle of answering this question. If I was, there's a door hanging on a telephone pole, like 30, 40 feet away from the apartment
Hmm.
front door. And if had been outside, then it would have I would have been in front of that door.
Hmm.
1 second. Hello? Okay, you could come down now. Do you need help with the vacuum? Okay. Well, we have a garbage down here if anything. We have a garbage down here if you need. Okay. Okay. So I think this is a perfect time actually to give
Close.
our yeah, to close.
Hmm.
And it's about an hour, and some of my favorite numbers on my watch, which is 11:09.
Yeah.
And I do want to have these to the extent that you can, somewhat regular, have these calls somewhat regular with you.
Yeah. I would love that.
Great, great. So
Yeah.
good input. We've set the goal. We have a good input
Absolutely.
coming into
Yep.
metabolism and energy. And I know me and you are both changing and we're doing beautiful work. And so
Yes.
me feeling as much alignment as I do with you, and from your past lives too, maybe I'll get a similar scar soon. And
Maybe.
the structure might change, and we'll
Yeah.
continue to create alchemy and further, because I just know there's so much richness here. So
There is. Yeah. All of our conversations just, I feel like they always just bring me deeper into myself. And I walk away feeling like my inner child has been in some way reawakened in a way that is that of the curious child looking at the world with that state of wonder and creativity. Even
mm,
though I tend to try to bring myself there, when I am lucky enough to have conversations with friends who they speak a similar language and we resonate with so many things. Um,
yeah, yeah, we
it's
do.
powerful. So thank you
Thank you, brother.
for
Thank you
this.
so much.
Mhm.
Okay,
All right. Have a beautiful day.
you too, brother.